Welcome to Voices from the Touchline. Today we are joined by A licensed coach James Baird, a Scottish-born coach with over 20 years of experience across three continents. From national teams to club football, men's and women's setup, James has built high-performance environments that get the best out of players. James, great to have you on. How are you?
No, it's wonderful to be here and talk to an old friend as well, and obviously bring the different cultures, to the show. So I'm looking forward to talking all things football.
Likewise, mate, likewise. Before we get into the coaching part, a bit of a trivia for all the audience. So, at the age of 42, you were called up to become a player again. Can you shed some light on that, please?
Well, that was quite an experience. So basically, about 4 months ago, a friend of mine who plays for Wallace in the British Virgin Islands, he's the goalkeeper there, and we worked together when I was in British Virgin Islands. He called me up and said, "James, what are you doing in 2 months?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "Well, I am supposed to play in a competition, and I won't be there, and I need you to come out of retirement." So I was kind of shocked at the time, but it gave me 2 months. So I got in the gym, I got running, I did a little work, and I came back and played. And it was quite the experience. I mean, I was maybe 20 years older than most of the players in the team, but I have to say, being back on the field, being back in the changing rooms, being in that environment, and also not just being a coach, because I mean, obviously, I've been on the other side of the spectrum now, being a coach. Being back as a player was quite a strange experience, you know. I mean, it's been about 8 years, I'd say, since I've played, and but I loved every minute of it. The team didn't do so great, but it was the first time they ever played in the CFU Challenge Series, which is basically like the equivalent, I suppose, of the Europa League or something, in Europe. So it was a great experience. I loved playing. I loved meeting the guys, and I would do it again if I was asked. It was so good.
Brilliant, brilliant. Nothing like getting back on the field, especially when you're a coach and you're so busy with conducting sessions, to get to play after so many years. So, now getting to coaching, you've coached across continents and cultures. So, what are the first steps you take to create a high performance environment, no matter where you are?
Well, the first thing I would always say is listen and observe because I mean, I think the experience I've gained over the last, maybe 10, 15 years, so when I first went into it, I had that ego and I thought I could go in and change everything. You can't do that. You're better to go in and actually get to know the people, see who's on the ground, observe, and then start putting down your markers. And then, so it's basically building the trust before you build the structure. And I think that's very, very important. And the longer I've been in the game coaching, I've realized that's the key because, like I said, you can't change everything. And the times I've tried to change everything was when there was problems.
Well, I mean, you've got so much experience, and I think on this podcast, we're going to be understanding all about your experiences as well as the men's and women's games. So, how do you balance creating structures with allowing creativity in both men's and women's teams, and do the approaches differ at all?
Well, I mean, obviously, in both sides, male and female is slightly different, but I think clarity and security is important. I mean, basically giving the message, that what you want from the players, whether it's male or female, and sticking to it, because I think sometimes we don't always do what we say, we kind of say what we do, we kind of do the opposite way around, and I think that's a problem. So you want to make sure, there's that clarity of the message, and then I think it's important not to basically give creativity and freedom to the players because I think too often we stagnate them and we don't let and I think that's one thing if you look at the way the game has changed over the last so many years it's became faster, it's became more skillful, it's became more like I would say an Olympics. And you don't want to stop that from happening. I mean, obviously, from a men's perspective, I think you have to hold the players accountable a little bit more. But on the female side, you want to empower the players, teach them about focus, teach them, give them that empowerment, that safe space to play. And that's the beauty of what I've done over the last 15 years. I've been able to see it from both sides of the spectrum. And as I say, I've enjoyed it and I love coaching on both sides, but players listen differently. For example, I find sometimes it's probably easier to coach male players because females will ask why, and you'll have to make sure you can explain why, and which is good because it makes you a better coach as well. So it's interesting that when you get to, uh, experience it from both sides, but as you do as well, I love coaching. So whether it's in the male side, whether it's in the female, I love what I do.
Yes, brilliant. You have also been involved with with the national team. So at national level, especially with the Trinidad and Tobago FA, how do you instill belief and identity in players during shorter camps?
Every coach has their game model, their philosophy. Obviously, you have a shorter space of time when you're with national teams, so you have to basically get it across very quickly. But it's also being clear and being concise, and not just showing it in the classroom. You have to be able to take it from the classroom and then actually show that what you mean on the field too. So whatever your sessions are on the field, it has to mimic what you've showed them, for example, on the whiteboard, on the slides that you show. And it's important if they don't have a correlation, you're going to lose your players. So it's very important you do that too. And then obviously you want to tap into things like nationally, like for example, the pride of playing for your country, heritage, the flag, the people, basically build up that out there. And in a sense, from a coaching perspective, you want them to run through walls for you. So when you're building that every second on the camp, and it comes to meals as a team, you get everybody involved. You don't have, little cliques, little groups. You want to make sure that everybody respects everybody, everybody gets to know everybody, and that includes staff and players. And then, as I say, when you get on the field, it's about focusing on small wins first. For example, in sessions, making sure the players get it. They know, what the point of the session is, and then you're hitting your targets. And then once they start to see those small wins in the training sessions, they start to see the clearer picture. And then when they go out in the field in the game time, they understand, this is just what we did in training. So it makes it a lot easier. But it's not an easy task because that's the difference between national football and club football. There is a huge difference. You don't have the players as long, but I think it's something that I've, grew to appreciate over the last couple of years that, it helps you build yourself as a coach that you're able to adapt to working in a national environment. But I've been fortunate that I've been able to work in both.
For sure, I like how you have spoken about man management. I would term that as. So, uh, a bit more towards the technical side now. So, you mention a high energy, high pressing style. So, how do you get a buy-in from players, particularly when they're unfamiliar with such an intensity?
Well, very similar to what I just said, they need to see it early on in the session. So, for example, one of the key components of my, high press and high energy system is about forcing mistakes on the opposition. And once you force mistakes, it creates chances for yourself too. So, for example, if you set your team up to play a high line to press the opposition, and the opposition are trying to build up from the back, and you force a mistake, you're going to create chances. And it's about building that into your session, and that's something that I've been fortunate enough as a young coach. I mean, even though I'm 42, I'd still class myself as a young coach. I've been able to do that, and the players were able to see it in the sessions and say, well, coach, man, that works. And every team that I've been with, the players would buy into it quickly. But I think it starts with the way you set up your drills again or your coaching session, so they can see it. If they don't see it, they're not going to believe it. And then obviously creating those chances, creating opportunities. And I think, as we know as coaches, it's all about repetition. The more you do it, the more the players see it happening, the more they're going to do it in game time. And it reminds me of when Arsene Wenger said, as a coach, you can't sit there with a controller controlling the players. You basically have to instill it into their minds that when they go out there, they do it naturally, with the freedom that they have as a player. And when you combine those two, I think it works very well. And also, I think one of the reasons why I kind of focused on that philosophy of a high pressing system, I think the region that I'm in CONCACAF has a lot of players with flair, a lot of energy, a lot of speed, and I think it worked well here. Now, as a coach, you may have to tailor your philosophy wherever you go, or to the different club you go to, the different environment. So I've been fortunate enough, my one marries well with where I am. But again, I know, and I'm not naive enough to say that, I might go to a different country and I might have to play, a more pragmatic system. So I think that's all about coaching, and that's the beauty of it. We have to change, we have to adapt.
Yes, with all your experience, you've worked with elite players as well as emerging talent. So, how do you tailor your environment building strategies for both?
Well, what I would say is, obviously, the elite players, you can only refine them a little bit. They have the basics. They have, for example, when you get an elite player, you're not going to be focusing on so much the technical side of the game. You're not going to be focusing on more bringing the team together. You're going to be bringing them, for example, more patterns of play, set pieces, basically things that, because they would already have the technical ability. You basically selected them on the technical ability they have. So there's only probably, like I always say, a 1 to 5% coaching, change in them and in their environment or in their way of playing. So that's the difference obviously between the emerging talent. You have a bit more molding to do. You can then work on that technical aspect and then obviously bringing in the technical, tactical, psychological, physical into it. But the younger players or the more emerging talents, you must focus a bit more on belief, a bit more on, packaging them differently in the sense that you're basically building them up. Whereas the elite players, they're already built up, and you're basically just trying to, you know, um, show them this is how we want to play. We want to, use your strengths to basically get the result as the team. So it's an interesting combination, and that's where again the different job you're in. For example, when I was working with British Virgin Islands, I was the national women's coach as well. And even though I was the senior national women's coach, it also depends on the standard of the players as well. So whereas the standard of the players in Europe maybe, or the top European countries maybe here, the standard of the players in different countries may be down here, and that's where you may have to tweak that, percentage because you may have to do some technical work with senior players, which is not ideal because obviously in Europe, a senior player, is basically the finished article in a sense, So again, it makes you a better coach because you inside your team there may be five players that are, an elite player, and you maybe have other players that are, emerging or, players that are just coming through. So again, it's about marrying them together and doing what's best for the team. And again, that's the challenge, and that's the enjoying part of it.
Yes, I mean, this is all about being realistic with, so coaching is never a utopian world, is it? So it's all about adapting, and I'm sure you're an expert because you've been at so many places. So now, talking further about your women's football experience. So, what specific environmental factors have you found most impactful for female player development?
Well, I think in this region, one of the things that's been key, and it's probably the other regions as well, is creating a safe space for the players. I mean, we all know that there's been a lot of changes and a lot of improvement in the female game too. For example, I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the improvement is phenomenal to the extent that, I mean, it's virtually there and there with men's game now in terms of spectators. The money, I mean, recently we've seen some female players getting signed for 1.5 million, 2 million, things like this. So it's caught up a lot, which is credit to the players, But it's about creating that safe space that the players can thrive in, and especially as a male coach in a female game, because this is another thing you see. And I mean, I remember recently reading Emma Haynes, who's the American coach now, who used to be with England, saying that she feels that there should also be female coaches in the male game, and she's right because, like she mentioned, there's female pilots, there's female doctors, so there should be that interchange really, and hopefully that will come. But from a playing perspective, it's about giving them the best environment to thrive in. And like I said, that's an environment that there's no problems in because we all know throughout the years there's been many different teams, many national programs that have had problems with whether it's things going on that shouldn't go on, let's say. So it's about creating that environment, these players, you can get the best out of them and you can teach them. And the one thing I've learned about female players, they want to learn. They want to learn and they will give you their best. And trust unlocks resilience and creativity. And that's what you want as a coach. And that's why, like I said, I really love working with female players because you can push them from a technical point of view, and they want to learn more and more. And you see the results pretty quick. And also, like I say, they ask the right questions. Sometimes and I'm a male, I can say this, us males, we just do it because we feel to do it, or or somebody's told us it, but we don't actually ask why. The female players will ask why. So from a coaching perspective, it's very interesting and it's challenging sometimes because you need to have the answers on the top of your head, to be able to give them. But it also makes you a better coach.
I agree because I've had the same experience with female players. Now, you mentioned about you being a male coach in the female game. So, has that ever been a challenge for you, or has it been smooth sailing?
For myself, I've never had issues with it. I mean, the only, I mean, the way I say even issues is obviously I've always made a rule that whenever I've coached in the female game, I would always have 50% of my staff would be female because there's obviously times that I can't go in the changing rooms when players are changing. So you have to have that at least a percentage or of your staff that can be in there because as we know, sometimes in changing rooms players could get hit up or get, angry with each other. Sometimes, somebody may say something. So you need to make sure we have that, I don't want to say authority, but accountability in the changing rooms. So I've always made it a rule that, like I say, 50% of my staff would be female. But from a coaching perspective, I've never had any issues. And I try to be, um, I try to watch how I say things because, especially coming from being a player, sometimes I may think something to say something, and then I think I probably shouldn't say it that way. Like, for example, when I was playing, we used to always say, "Hey guys." But obviously, when you're coaching the female side of things, you don't want to say that because obviously it's not guys you're coaching. So sometimes I have to really think, to say it. But the good thing is, players understand. So if you say something sometimes, I mean, unless it's something, a major mistake, they will understand. So I've been very fortunate. I mean, some others haven't, but as I say, I try to check myself, as I say, and making sure I'm doing things right. And also, my staff, I will create an environment that my staff will come to me and say, James, maybe you could do this better, or I will go to them. And that helps with that because, like I said, maybe I might say it a way that one of the females in the staff might say, James, maybe you should say that a little differently, or when I'm preparing. So it's about having that support staff as well that, will help you. But as I say, I've been very fortunate.
And how do you address player motivation when results aren't going your way, especially in, let's say, a long or difficult season or a tournament that isn't going as well as you want it to go?
Well, I think the key is reminding players of the bigger picture or the vision. For example, whenever we take a job, we as coaches have to, in a sense, sell the board or the executive or the member association on what we're going to bring to the table. And sometimes, from a player perspective, it's about creating smaller goals. We may not be winning, but maybe we're doing something very well that will build on and could get wins down the line. So it's about, as I say, making small chunks rather than big chunks. In England, for example, I think it was Ant Postecoglou coaching Tottenham. A lot of people were saying that his style was not working, but I think he always said he would win something and then he went on and win something. So it's about having that clear vision, not being scared to do things because ultimately you came in there with that vision. So you don't want to halfway through, 3 months and say, well, it's not working, I need to change it because that's usually a problem for coaches. Once you start to change, usually is where a coach might get sacked or things because you're changing it from something you know to something you feel might be better in the circumstance. Now, I'm not saying changing a formation or a system is bad because in games you may have to, go to a 4-5-1 to protect a result or things. I'm just talking about changing your philosophy, and that's where, I mean, your core values have to be important. So whatever system you're playing, your core values, your philosophy have to be there.
Well, I have a follow-up here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, let's assume that you're losing 5 games in a row, 7 games in a row. Then does there come a point where you start thinking maybe I do need to change my vision, or would you say just continue?
Well, I think this is where it's a great question. From my perspective, like I said, I've always said my philosophy is not necessarily a system. For example, my philosophy is my core values and how I want to play. So I believe that I don't have to change my philosophy because the core values, for example, my core values are hard work, determination, high pressing, high energy. I believe I can take those same core values into another system. So, for example, let's say I was playing a 4-2-3-1, it's not working now. So maybe I have to go to a 5-3-2, but I can still apply that same philosophy. It may not be as high pressing as I want, but I'm using the same core values. And that's the way I look at it. Different coaches have their own opinion, but that's the way I see it. So it's basically you're taking the blueprint rather than the actual plan, and using that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Good points there. Now you've had amongst the million things you do, you've been a technical director, you've been a head coach, you've been a goalkeeping coach. So how does collaboration across staff impact the environment we create for players?
Well, one of the things people that get to know me is I love people. So I love, to have conversations. And one of the things I love doing is putting a staff together. And sometimes people think, you pick a staff because it's your friends and yes, sometimes it is the people you trust that you use. But um, I've been very fortunate to work with many coaches, many physios, many managers from different countries from all over the world. And it's important to get the right person for the right role. So for example, getting to know the culture, whether it's in a country that maybe doesn't speak English, so you need staff there that, maybe I can't speak Spanish, I need staff there that can. So it's about bringing together people with similar, I suppose, core values, like I spoke about, that can work together. And I think by adding that perspective and bringing together that vision, and then also thinking about what the players need. So for example, it may be that you have an opportunity to bring in a coach or an assistant coach that is the best assistant coach in the world, or let's say, for example, but it may be that your team needs something different. Maybe they need a coach that's more of a motivator. Maybe they need a coach that's more of a philosopher or something like that. So you're actually bringing in what is needed for that role, and that's one of the things I enjoy, trying to pick the right people to help me, because I mean ultimately we're all, I don't want to say slaves to the players, but we're there to help the players. Sometimes people think being a coach is, a position of authority. I mean, it is to an extent, but really we're there to get the best out of the players. So we're like the guardians, really. They're the talent. So it's about bringing the right people in to get, the job done. And like I said, that's something that I've enjoyed. And also it's about making sure the staff speak with one voice. So for example, whatever I'm saying, if I'm not there, let's say I have a day that I'm off sick, which doesn't happen, but my assistant coach will give the same message. Or if I get sent to the stands in a game because I've been over eager, they're going to play the same way. So it's about having that continuity in the staff as well.
Fair point. And now talking about feedback, which is so important because communication plays such a big role. What role does feedback, in your opinion, both giving and receiving, play in shaping a positive team culture?
Well, this is interesting because I did my A license 2 years ago, and this was a massive part in the license that we did about because I think when you go from B to A, you do ask your players for feedback, but the A license is a bit more. You want to make sure the players understand it. So one of the things as a head coach, for example, after my sessions and even during the sessions, I would always be making sure either from asking questions, the players get it, or even just looking for body language. But then the longer I've been in the game, you get used to, for example, having one-on-ones, and the one thing I would say with one-on-ones in the female game is, as a male, I would always have somebody else with me. It's not making sure you're not in that environment to be a one-on-one because that's where problems can occur. But making sure the players understand, having team meetings. So it's basically using all the different tools, using, for example, WhatsApp groups, Zoom, which we're using, different things, all the tools that we have, we're using them to basically get feedback from the players because you may have a player who learns differently to the rest. So you may think, so for example, one of the things I use a lot is slides. I would send the players slides out before a camp or before a game. This is how the team wants to play in possession, out of possession, set pieces, etc. But maybe, for example, maybe one of the players doesn't read so well. Maybe one of the players, isn't able to see that picture that you're trying to create. So basically, you need to use all the assets we have. So it could be that you show that player a video one on one. Could be that you have a group, So for example, you bring the defenders in together and you have a discussion with the defenders and you show them this is how we want to do it. Or maybe you also do it in the field. So it's basically using all the different ways of, getting feedback. But I think it is important during your sessions to get some kind of feedback from your player. But like I said, this is where, as a coach, we're not just coaches. We have to be a psychologist. We have to be a fitness coach. We have to be all these things because we should be able to look at a player's body language, look at the way they're doing the session, they're getting involved, to tell if they understand what we are putting across to them. But again,
I'm
we have to take it a stage further than that.
Yeah, I'm quite envious of you and your journey because me as a coach, I'm in my comfort zone, where language is not a problem, culture is not a problem, but you're obviously having to deal with, another gender, you're having to deal with all sorts of things, and maybe language, maybe whatever it might be. So, how do you deal with external pressures? So, like, this would include, I would say, the players' parents or the club hierarchy or the media that can influence the player environment, particularly in youth and women setups, which are quite delicate.
Well, just before I give you a thing on that, I just wanted to say something, and just what you just mentioned there about, the feedback thing. I was actually in Madrid about 4 months ago with FIFA, and I had to coach in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but I was fortunate enough to have a few people around me that did, and I can pick up things pretty quick. But again, it's about having the trust in the people around you. So I just wanted to make that point that sometimes we have to, trust them to know that. And it's like Mourinho was the same when I think he worked under Bobby Robson. He was the voice for Bobby Robson. So it's doing that. So anyway, coming back to the external pressures, I think again, it's getting to know those people you spoke about. For example, whether it is the parents, whether it is the board, whether it is the fans, etc. Because each one has a different element of pressure. For example, the players see a new coach coming in with a new idea. They have a set of characteristics, a set of demands that they will set on you. The supporters expect, for example, you to win. The board may expect you to win the league, for example, not just win per game. So it's about getting to know them and then obviously using the experience you have and using your plan or your philosophy to build that. But it's interesting because like I said, for example, we talk about parents. Even in that bracket of parents, there's different styles of parents or different types of parents. You may have that parent that's overzealous and they want their player to play every time, and you have to be able to manage that. You may have a parent that's just there to watch. You may have a parent that doesn't say much, but you can tell So it's about again getting to know them, and I think one of the things I think I mentioned to you is I love people. I love getting to know people. So to me, for me, that's one of my favorite parts of the game is building those relationships. Now, sometimes they can go bad because, like I said, if a board hires you after 10 games and you're not doing what you said, obviously you do start to feel the pressure. And that's where having a family and having an outlet personally comes in because when I was a younger player, when I'd go through pressure, it was difficult because you didn't have that necessarily, especially when you're abroad. But when you get older and you have your family, I have a son as well, I have my wife, or even friends to be able to bounce things off. It's not going so well. And I've been fortunate enough, for example, one of my assistant coaches is one of my best friends. So we would have a lot of conversations outside of football, and that would help. But when you don't have that, that could be a problem. For example, maybe you fly off to a country that is on the other side of the world, you don't know too many people, and quickly things become bad. That's when it would be a real challenge. I've not experienced that, because I've been fortunate enough, but it could happen.
Well, yes, you have had so many experiences and you've succeeded, so I'm sure, optimistic you would find your way out here as well. Looking back at your most successful sports, so your sports that you've worked with, you've been involved with, what common environmental traits would they share that have allowed players to succeed and grow?
Um, I think you have to create a family environment. I mean, and that sounds very cliche because, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people say that, but it's about having an environment that everybody's comfortable in. And when I say everybody, I don't just mean 10 of the players, I mean every player because, like I say, and I'll split it from a male perspective, it may be that, the team may be all full time, some may be part time. So it's about, creating an environment that everybody's benefiting, everybody's working together, and they all see the goal. And then if you take it across to the female side, for example, you know, one of the things I realized is females have different goals. Females have different thought processes. Even things like, for example, obviously, what happens when a player becomes pregnant? For example, what happens if a player is on their cycle, and all these things you have to manage as a coach that I had to learn throughout the years, and that's what makes it interesting. But when you have that family environment, now as I say, in a family, we all know sometimes somebody might upset you in the family too, but it's about getting over those problems quickly and sorting it out. So when you have that family environment, people can come to you and tell you, Coach, I'm not feeling so well today. Coach, I've got this problem. Coach, I need some help. Or coach, I don't like how you did that, and when you create that, that's when I feel you get the most success. And that's what fortunately I've been in those situations that, and even now when I look back, one of the things now it's not, I don't want to say it's egotistic, it may sound that way, but most of the players I've coached, I still keep in touch with now, and they will call me up and say, Coach, how are you doing? And they want to know. And so we've created that bond that even after playing, even years after sometimes, they will call me for advice. They will call me to, for example, for the male side of things, maybe call me and say, would you like to come and, meet my son or daughter, So when you create that family environment, it benefits the team, and I think you get the best results.
I think you've mastered the art of people skills and man management, that's for sure. Now, you've had roles. You've been a head coach, as I said. You've been an assistant coach. You've been a goalkeeping coach. You've been a technical director. So, if you had to choose one, which is your favorite role?
Being a head coach is my favorite. I mean, I think I like to. The good thing about being a head coach is you have other people there to support you. Whereas when you're an assistant coach or a goalkeeping coach, you're the support, which is great as well. But I like the fact that I'm the one that has to, along with my staff, design the philosophy of the team. I like all the aspects, like you said, the man management, recruiting players, dealing with, team meetings. I mean, and to some extent, other people have told me, well, technical director suits me more because sometimes people say that I'm good off the field and on the field. But for me, I like to be in the thick of the coaching, which is to me being the head coach. I like to be able to feel, teams doing well because we can see what the work we've put in and that kind of thing. But as I say, I mean, I wouldn't change any of the roles I've had. I've loved every role, and I think it's made me not only the coach I am, but the person I am. So I've been very fortunate.
But yes, head coach, that's where the adrenaline is. That's where
Yes,
the
that it
excitement
is.
is at the end of the day. So yes, James, this has been fantastic. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed talking to you. The thoughts you've given, your opinions are definitely going to help a lot of our audience. And yes, grateful and thank you for taking the time out.
No, the pleasure is all mine, and hopefully maybe one day I get over to India to coach. I mean, it's somewhere that I've always wanted to
Yeah,
coach. I've
yeah,
always
yeah,
said
yeah.
that, and I know one of the things that always caught my eye is some of the crowds that you all get at matches. It would be phenomenal to coach in that kind of environment.
Yes, for sure. And there is a big, I would say, increase in the number of foreign coaches that are coming to India. So you never know.
Oh, that'd be
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah, yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.